My name is Sarah Miller. My maiden name was Lev, and I came in Stamford in 1965 with my family, two children, and my husband. I was born November 30, 1926, in a Jewish shtetl called Derechin, Poland. I'm the middle child of a family of 8. My father was a well-educated man from a prestigious yeshiva in the vicinity of the village of my birth. When my mother became of age, my grandfather, a well-to-do businessman in his village, went to this yeshiva and chose my father as his son-in-law. My mother, a romantic at heart, did not have much to say in this matter. She accepted her fate, and besides, the groom-to-be was a handsome young man. In 1918, we got married. My grandfather installed my father into a business of leather goods, but my father, all his life a student, was no businessman. He was too soft and trustful with the peasants of the surrounding villages, and no match for the hard dealers of the big town of Varsovie. I remember a story he told us once. Then when he went to Varsovie to buy merchandise, he came back without merchandise and without money. Meanwhile, a new child was coming to this world like a clock every year and a half, and my father was not able to make a living for his family of 7. By then, my grandfather was gone, and in this poor village there was no need for another rabbi or teacher. So, in desperation and with the approval of my mother, he left his family behind to seek work in Europe. The year was 1932. My father wandered in a few countries until he found work as a shochet, a ritual chicken slaughterer, at a Jewish food store in a working-class neighborhood in Paris, France. There he struggled for 5 years, a job he did not like, but did it anyway in order to earn a living and save enough money for his family to come over. He also told us once that the first time he had to kill a chicken, he fainted in the blood, he fainted on the floor. Then he got used to it. And so on January 3, 1937, my mother with 7 children in tow, the oldest 17, the youngest 5, joined our father in Paris, France. This was a big adjustment for me. I did not like our apartment of 2 small dark rooms, a kitchenette large enough for only one person to stand, a walled-in backyard, and a father I hardly knew. I missed the open sky of my village and my girlfriends who spoke my language. But being young and curious, adjusting to this new world came promptly. We were poor, but we were safe. I, with my younger sister and 2 brothers, took the metro every day to attend a private French school sponsored by the famous Hirsch family, where the Jewish holidays were observed and kosher meals served. In 1939, when World War II came about and France was occupied by the Germans, our safe world was turned upside down. With no more schooling, we were exposed to all the humiliation of being Jewish under the Nazi occupation. When targeted for deportation, my father prayed for a miracle, and my smart mother fought back to save her family, separating us in small groups and send us to the countryside for safekeeping. My youngest sister and I wound up in a village called the Gedenu, where we lived with an old woman in filthy conditions and poor nutrition. Thanks to the help of a married sister, my parents stayed on in Paris, hiding in a small apartment under false identity. I knew the address and was able to correspond with them. At one time, my little sister, with my approval, left the village for Paris. She traveled all alone by train with a live chicken in a bag to find her parents. A live chicken in the bag was purposely done because so my father could kill it and they could have some food later on, because they lived in very, not poor conditions, but they got very little food to eat. And my poor mother had to wait in line with her heavy Jewish accent and wait in line and to get food like everybody else. This was a frightening experience for an 11-year-old child, but she did find them. Soon after, she was sent to a French family in the country, where another sister and baby brother were staying. I, being a teenager by then, not wanting to be a burden to my parents, went to the only coffee shop in town and asked for a job as a maid in exchange for food and shelter. They said yes, the price was right, but for shelter, each day after work at night, I had to cross the village to get to a decrepit building without heat, water, or electricity. I do remember sometimes I couldn't find it because it was so dark they didn't have street lights then. I could hear the rats moving in the darkness. I survived this unpleasant experience 1 full year. My mother, knowing how unhappy I was, wrote to me that I should return, not to stay with them, as this was impossible, but she had a plan. I think thanks to my married sister who lived someplace in France in hiding too. An handsome young man came to my parents' hiding place to rescue me. He was sent by an underground fighting group called La Sixième. He gave me a false identity card, taught me a new family background corresponding to my forged papers, told me to remember it all well in case we were questioned by the French police or the German Gestapo. He guided me under dangerous conditions by railroad to a town called Clermont-Ferrand. There I stayed in hiding with other Jewish youngsters for another year, until the time when we were smuggled safely to Switzerland. I returned to Paris, France in May 1945 to an apartment emptied of all its contents, but the family intact. Upon facing the facts of the horror of the Holocaust and the realization that in the village of my youth the entire Jewish population had been assembled in one day, walked to the neighboring woods and massacred, I realized that our family's survival was truly a miracle. When I returned home, I was 19 years old. In Switzerland, I had worked and studied to be a pediatric nurse in a camp for new mothers. I showed my parents a complimentary certificate I received with the advice to continue my studies. My mother said no. I was not going to be a maid in a hospital. I was going to get married soon and be a maid to my own children. Poor Mama had to wait 11 years for the pleasure of seeing me settling down into marriage. Thanks to a friend of my father, I soon went to work for a charming and witty but crooked lawyer. My office work consisted of entering accounting figures into the ledgers of his business clients. Once a month, I was sent on an errand. I crossed Paris by subway, which I loved because I could read for 45 minutes. At the address indicated, I rang the bell and gave to the maid who answered the door an envelope with cash as payment for a certified accountant I never met. Wanting to better myself professionally, after working hours for the lawyers, I began to take private lessons in the secretarial skills with a retired teacher. A year later, while looking for employment in a Jewish-French newspaper at home, I responded to a request for a secretary at a clothing manufacturer centered in Paris. I was interviewed by 2 partners and hired on the spot. I was doing well and happy at my new job. Then one day I got a letter from OSE, a French Jewish welfare organization signed by Mr. Pugach, a psychiatrist whom I met briefly in Switzerland. There, while in transit camp, he came to visit all the Jewish kids to lecture us about our proud heritage. I recall dancing a hora with him and singing Hebrew songs. Now his letter was telling me that the Jewish welfare organization was in great need of young people like me to help as counselors to many Jewish orphans of the Holocaust. Those children were housed temporarily near Paris. Our task was to make a home for them until the time they would be free to travel to Israel. Meanwhile, our family in the USA invited us to come over. Due to the American quota system, My parents could not take along all the unmarried children. Therefore, sponsored by an aunt, my parents, together with my youngest sister and baby brother, who was born in Paris, left for the USA. My sister Claire and I, sponsored by another relatives, were waiting for our visa. My two older brothers were staying with us in our apartment. The two older sisters were married by then and on their own. So here I was, employed with a good job, with the prospect of immigrating soon to the golden country of America, and in my hands a letter from the Jewish Welfare Organization telling me that I was needed. Did I listen to reason? No. I resigned from my company, left home to join a group of young people for a crash course in child psychology, traditional Judaism and Zionism under the leadership of Mr. Pugach. Upon graduation, I went to work in a home full of children. They spoke the language of their country of origin, but we managed to communicate. French was taught during day classes. 6 months later, a group of children with their counselors, me included, left for Marseille. There, in a transit camp ready to Israel, we lived in a beautiful home on the outskirts of the town, facing the ocean. In December 1948, we left for Israel. On our arrival in Haifa, the children were transferred with loving care by leaders of Aliyat Noar to their new, safe homes. I was left in a transit camp close to Haifa, on my own as an adult, with no money and little life experience. What a culture shock for me, from seeing religious bearded men riding farm trucks, to modern pioneers speaking Hebrew, to meeting those new strange-looking refugees speaking Yiddish or the language of the country they came from. I left the camp to look for my brother Jacques, who was in the new Israeli army. He came with a group of volunteers from France as fighters for the War of Independence. I was a shocking surprise for him, since he did not expect me at all. I also found cousins and family, old-timers, real pioneers. They were all very nice to me and helpful, but nevertheless, I was on my own, meaning that for the next 7 years, I had a lot of learning to do, adjustments to go through, painful and difficult decisions to make before I felt like I was home and loving this new little country called Israel. My working experiences ranges from living in a kibbutz a year to 2 years in the Israeli army to various other employments such as being a maid and a factory worker. Finally, in Tel Aviv, a good position came along as a clerk in an insurance company where the knowledge of English was needed, but I did not speak it. With the help of some co-workers, I survived 2 weeks, and with my first paycheck, I ran to Berlin School of Languages to subscribe classes in English. While I was talking to the secretary in French, an aristocratic-looking, mature man who walked out from his office introduced himself as Monsieur Cohen, Directeur General of Berlin Schools in the Middle East. We talked for a little while, then he said that his secretary is leaving and that he wanted to hire me as his personal secretary. I was in shock and very pleased that he asked little me for such a nice position. A school of all places. I said no first because I was too afraid. He insisted, telling me not to worry. Once again, I did not listen to reason, but to my heart. And so I did make a change. Working for this French scholar, Monsieur Cohen, was one of my best life experiences in Israel. A full happy year passed by. Then a registered letter came from the U.S. Embassy telling me that my visa to leave Israel for America was ready. It was time for me to join my family. I arrived in this country January 1956. I stayed with my parents in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for a little while, then moved on to live with my married sister in Queens. I find work with a steamship company in downtown New York City as a payroll clerk. even though I did not speak English yet. Soon after, I met my husband-to-be, a Polish Jew. We got married October 1957, happily ever after. My daughter Rebecca was born August 5th, 1958, and my son was born April 7, 1962. My son Gabriel, amen. We moved as a family from Queens to Mamaroneck and from there to Stamford in 1965. We did not know a soul in this town, except the Jewish real estate lady, Florence Friedman, a native of Stamford, who sold us a small house that her uncle built on Hope Street. My husband found employment with the Laston family, and I found work as a bookkeeper at the Stamford Day Nursery where my little boy was registered. 5 years later, I resigned. While looking for another position, I signed up for night classes at Reform High School for an accounting class. Then luck came my way. I was hired by the owner of a private segregated country club in Darien, Mr. Auchincloss, as the full-charge accountant bookkeeper. A big surprise for me, since I volunteered to tell the owner of the club that I'm Jewish on our first interview. He hired me anyway. Maybe he hired me because I told him the truth. Even though his accountant who checked me out advised him that I was not qualified professionally to do the job. I stayed there for 5 years, their first Jew, doing my best not to disappoint them. It was one of my most interesting and satisfying positions in this country. Later on, I worked for the American Red Cross in Stamford until my retirement in 1991 at age 65. Today, at age 72, I'm a happy grandmother of 4 grandchildren. My daughter has a boy and a girl, and my son has a girl and a boy. I'm a widow now and missing my husband and friend very much. I do volunteer work now, not because I'm a senior and have nothing else to do, but because it satisfies my soul and makes me feel good. The truth is that I also did volunteer work when I was much younger, worked full-time, raised 2 children without the help of a maid or a grandmother. I thank my husband who encouraged me to have confidence in myself and not to be shy. But it is my mother who inspired me and taught me by her example to do the right thing and to have heart. I will never forget a scene of many years ago in our apartment in Paris. We were poor, but my mother managed to give a meal every Wednesday to a young yeshiva boy. Once I asked her why and who he was. Her answer was that he came from Poland to avoid being drafted in the Polish army. Each day of the week, he was getting a meal in a different Jewish home, otherwise he would starve. I also recall the blue pushke, a box on a shelf in our apartment, reminding us of our duty to put in change. When full, it was delivered to the National Jewish Fund for the purpose of buying land in Eretz Israel, Palestine then. In 1980 or 81 in Stamford, the American Red Magen David for Israel established a new chapter called Harvest. Its first president was Tamar Baumgard. Soon after, I became their treasurer, lasting 7 years. In 1988, I became the president for 2 years, a position I did not volunteer, but was drafted by the board. Today, year 1999, I'm still involved as secretary of Harvest chapter. It is such a worthy cause, how can I say no? As a volunteer at the Jewish Center Library, I come regularly on Fridays. The United Jewish Federation of Stamford sometimes calls me for some help in their mailing. If I can, it is my pleasure to come and help a little. Today, August 1999, I still live in Stamford. The provincial town I met 34 years ago grew a lot. I remember the private homes aligned on Summer Street. Today it is a one-way street, busy with heavy traffic. Rebuilt on each side are tall office buildings. The Stamford Day Nursery, where my little boy stayed for 3 full years, moved to a new location. On its old place is now an apartment building. The old synagogue, Agudat Shalom, where I belong and took my little children on our first Jewish holiday, moved on to Strawberry Hill Avenue. The old synagogue is now a Christian denomination. I remember a big holiday party at the old Jewish Center on Prospect Street, sponsored by B'nai Brit Stanford Lodge, where my husband was a member of good standing, later on its president. Coming to Stanford in 1965 was an adventure. Staying was and is a satisfying experience. Life goes on. Nothing stays in one place. My name is Sarah Lev Miller, and today is Stanford, August 20, 1999. P.S. I'm giving permission to the Jewish Historical Society to use this tape as they use the other taped biographies. Thank you.